Okay guys, so here we have the Sapphire 7900XTX Nitro Plus GPU. As you can see here, it is a 3-fan GPU and it's got quite a massive cooler. So when you think about dropping it down from what it is to what we're going to put it to, you think, whoa, why do we need to? But I want an all-in-one system where it's all water-cooled, so that's the reason why we're doing it here. So first things first, look at all the screws, and then we get our little screwdriver from iFixit. Get the right screwdriver head, because the last thing we want to do is start rounding off screws. So that looks like the right one to me. So we'll start with just removing these screws. Now, depending on what country you're in, some countries have rules on whether you can take your GPU apart and repaste it basically because of warranty. But as long as you don't damage your PCB, you're very, very careful, you shouldn't have this concern. Now, the other thing I do have, which I do use frequently and often, so I don't lose any screws during the GPU swap out, is I have this magnetic bowl here, which I'm just going to put there. And all I'm going to do is take the screws and place them in there so that they don't disappear. Because how many of you have taken apart something and then not been able to find the screws and put it back together? I know how frustrating it is. Now, we know that we were seeing temps between 82 and 86 on the air, so I'm looking forward to see what the temperatures are when we're not on air cooling. Now all the screws are removed with a little bit of patience. Let me just double check. No, there are no screws on the other side. So a little bit of patience and a little bit of gentle prying. We were able to lift off. Now, you will see from here, like I mentioned before, you do have these extra blocks. Now, they do sit in these gaps. I am wondering whether this back plate will just touch those, because if they will, which they might, it might just be worth leaving them where they are. So we won't remove it, because obviously, in my opinion, if Sapphire put it there, they put it there for a reason. So what we will do for a second, now we know we definitely can get this off, is we'll just gently place it back in place for a moment, just because we want to double check if any of the screws that are attaching the cooler, which we can see there are 3 there. So we need to take those 3 out. Again, make sure you use the right screw head for these. So because these are a slightly different screw, oh no, they're fine. You can use the same screw head. Now, the other bonus to do in the video when you take anything apart is you can see what you did. So that's those 3 screws out. Again, 3 small black screws. They go in there. So I'll put that little other attachment back. So now we know that this, we'll take this last screw out, is no longer attached to the cooler. So it was 4 screws in total. 1, 2, 3, and a 4th one there. So we'll take this away for a minute. We'll lift this back off. Again, gentle. Don't have to be too rough with this because you don't want to damage the PCB. Okay. Now, in theory, with everything unscrewed, this should, yeah, that's loose. So that's loose of the cooler, so that's fine. What I have noticed is there are 2 connectors here which you will have to pry up. Now you can do one or 2 things. You can, if you can get your nail in there, use a nail, or again, just to protect the PCB, this is the reason why I use gloves, because if you touch thermal pads, you want to be able to make sure you haven't contaminated them. There we go. There we go. So, like I said, you have these 2 connectors here. There's a couple of options you can use. You need to be extremely careful if you do what I'm doing, which is where you get a flathead screwdriver. You just gently pry up the sides like so, and then you just pull it away. Like I said, you don't want to break the cables, but you will find they will just lift. Bear with me a moment. So I had to do a little bit of a pry with this, but I've got them both out, so that's good. So now, flip this back over, safely remove this for the 3rd and final time. That's all good. And then what we want to do is, you've got 4 screws that hold the cross plate in place. You also do have this sticker, so you can try and remove it gently. But it's not going to work. So what we do is we're just going to remove the sticker, and I'll come back. So the sticker is now removed. Now what we're going to do is we're going to remove the X clamp. Now the thing with the X clamp is you always make sure when you remove an X clamp, again, you check your screws, because you don't want to use the wrong screw on the wrong hole. Right, that's fine. So what you do now is you remove the X clamp. All you do is you do it one at a time, but you do a 1/4 turn on each one, because what you don't want to do is cause adverse pressure on the PCB or the GPU die. So you just keep going in the same pattern. So I'm going in a crisscross pattern. So I'm going top right, bottom left, top left, bottom right. And you just keep going in that pattern until you have completely removed the X clamp. What you don't want to do is cause that pressure. Like I said, the iFixit kit's really good for this, because you can literally put your hand on the top and it just spins, so you don't have to worry about too much. your hand twist. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the clamp off. Like I said, fairly straightforward when you remove it. Just be gentle and careful when you do it. That's all you gotta do. And I'm going to turn this a little bit more this way so you've got better views. I didn't realise that it was that far out. So there you go. So that's the X clamp off. The screws stay on the clamp anyway. Just make sure the springs are still in place when you take it off. We've got nothing to worry about there. And then what you will find is the GPU should gently come away. Again, don't put too much pressure on it because there could be something stopping it. There shouldn't be anything because we've unscrewed the entire cooler and there's no screws coming through the PCB. But it's always worth keeping an eye on it just in case. Now there does appear to be something stopping it. Bear with me a moment, I'll come back. Okay, so due to how the cooler block is designed, the cooler's designed, we're going to have to take the cooler apart. Now, I didn't foresee that, so my error on that one, but it's fine. We can still do this, it's just a case of popping that back on there for now, making sure it touches the thermal pads, and flipping over. I can feel that it's loose, but it just doesn't want to give it up. So what we'll do is we'll remove the cooler completely. To do this, we will need a different screw head because it's got a different screw type on it. So these are all now hex bolts. So what we'll do is we'll take this one out first. Fairly straightforward, just comes out. Also trying to make sure that we don't mark the PCB or the plastics. Now, to protect it a little bit, what I am going to do in a moment is I'm going to put a plastic pad down. Or a piece of cardboard, I haven't decided yet. Two, three. And there might be, yep, there's another one at the top. 4. Right, that's the fan array off. And why does this not want to lift off? Okay, so it's finally given up. There we go. So that's off of there like that. As you can see, thermal paste was done pretty well at the time when they built it. The pads have come off quite easily, so we haven't got to worry too much about damaged pads. So if we ever need to put this cooler back on, it's not going to be too much of a concern. What we do need to do is get the pads off, but before we get the pads off, we need to get this off. So this does appear to be just kind of sitting there at the moment. Now, in looking at it, we've got cooling on the chokes here, thermal pads there. So similar to what we're going to be doing with the water block. So let me get this off and we'll have a look again. So Why does this not want to come away? We've unscrewed it from there. Any more screws that we weren't expecting. So we'll take it off again. Starting to feel like my desk is getting a bit cluttered, so we'll take some stuff away. Right. There's not a single screw holding that down. So why does that not want to move? It could just be the pads being a little bit, oh yeah, there we go. There we go, right. Okay. So, there we go. Okay. So like I said, just protect the thermal pads. Whenever I stick the PCB back on the desk, I'm just going to place this on there just to be safe. Bear with me. Cool. Right. So now we have the PCB. Roll that back onto there for a second. And I'm going to take a look at the PCB now. So we've got these additional thermal pads that haven't come away. So what we're going to do is just run our guitar pick over the top of that. We're just going to move that to there. Try to drop it all the thing. I'm just going to do that. Fairly straightforward. Without damaging the PCB. I'm just going to put that one on there. So, moved across, no problem at all, no issues. Now, there are some additional thermal pads in placement here. So we can see that when the Sapphire block was installed, we can see that you have thermal pads for your chokes on both sides, thermal pads for the VRMs as well, and you can see the way it's designed. So basically, in this case, we have a pad that sits here, which is currently still on the PCB, which is there. So we're going to lift that off and we're going to place that on the block. Very carefully. I'm trying to drop it on the desk like. There we go, back on there. Same again with this, so we're going to take this and we're going to use the guitar pick just to run underneath, so we're not taking any actual pad away. Just want to make sure when we take the pad off, we're not damaging it in any way. Being very, very meticulous with it, just because you don't want to break the pad. Flip it around, and stick it back where it belongs. Some people you like to use tweezers for this. I find tweezers quite fiddly, so use my fingers. And then what I'll do is I'll use the guitar pick to put it back in place, like so. Okay, and the same with this one. So again, back in place, and then there we go. Right, so all the thermal pads are off the block. So now what we can do is we can put all this to one side for now, but you can kind of see the design idea behind this. So you've got a heatsink before the heatsink for the die. So they're two separate pieces, which is quite a good design. What we're going to do is pop this over here, just so it's not in our way. And then we are down to just the block. So, the PCB. Now, because I'm a little bit concerned about the PCB at this point, just going to grab one of the anti-static bags from the system, from the block, to put on there. Okay, so we need to get some IPA on these, keep these clear up, clean it all up, get all the old thermal pads off, and then I will be back. Okay, so what I've done is I've zoomed in a little bit, just so you can see. I've grabbed some cotton buds, and I've got some isopropyl alcohol. And all we're going to do is pop the alcohol into this container. Don't need too much, just a little bit. Very strong stuff, so do be careful. Always make sure you're in a ventilated area when you use this stuff. And you're just going to dip cotton bud in there, and we're just going to clean off all the little bits of the board that need a clean. Spread things up a little bit here because I spent about 10 minutes cleaning this and making sure it was all good. So all you're doing here is using the IPA to remove the thermal grease from or thermal paste from the GPU die, and also making sure the old thermal pad residue is removed from all the individual components as well. Just make sure that you take some care and attention and your time with this. Just be patient. It's worthwhile taking your time. Just go around checking your different bits. So all the sticky stuff, so you've got this is clean now. As you can see, my chips are clean. These have been cleaned. There is still some little remnants which I'm going to try and get out again, but I thought I'd give it a break for a minute. But you can see that's looking really clean. Any questions, do pop them in the comments below as well, but I'm going to carry on. Okay guys, so now that I've got the GPU cleaned, I'm going to refer to the Bykski manual, which is on the AliExpress website where I bought the actual product from. You can see here that you've got the image of the PCB. You've also got the thermal pad layout as well. So the thing to keep in mind with this is make sure that you check that your PCB matches the PCB that you have. You will notice on my PCB I've got red capacitors. On this one it has blue ones, but again, as long as the PCB layout, where the VRMs are, the chokes are, the RAM is, everything matches up, which in my case it does. As I said, it shows you the thermal layout. So the difference here is, unlike the reference cooler, doesn't cover the chokes, it only covers the VRMs, which again is fine. So the chokes are just a coil, so they don't require as much thermal cooling anyway, and the whole block's going to be water cooled, so the block is going to run cooler in general. Now, what I'm going to do now is set my phone aside and we will start cutting the thermal pads. We've got them here. Now we're looking at the guidance that we've got in front of us and thermal pads we have here. Now, in looking at the thermal pads, and in answer to my own question, why are the pads designed the way they're designed? So, this corrugated thing is actually not a corrugation of the pad, it is just the pad itself has got a plastic sheet on it. So what we're going to do now is we're not going to stick massive strips on here. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to make individual pieces for the individual parts. So in this case, I'm going to go with the RAM modules first. So I can either do a long piece or I can do it as individual bits. Now, according to that, it's one long piece. In every other block I've done, it's been separate bits. So for me and for my peace of mind, I am going to do individual squares. So roughly the size of the RAM chips, which is probably about there. I'm just going to use my eyesight. And there we go. Pretty much bob on. Now, what I am going to do is just to make sure, I'm going to get my thermal pad that I've already made one from. Pop that there like that. I'm just going to cut them the same. If anything, what it might be worth me doing, because this is quite finicky, I'm going to do it without the gloves on. So bear with me a minute. I'm going to cut some and I'll come back to you. Okay, so we're halfway through, well, almost halfway through the installation of the thermal pads. So we've done all the thermal pads for all the memory chips and the chokes, but we need to do the last two. So I'm just going to do those and I'll come back. Okay, so great news. We have got all of the thermal pads in place. We do need to take the plastic off them, but they are there. They are all done. Just to give you guys an idea of what it looks like. That is it with them all in place. Guys, you'll notice the video is a bit sped up here just because thermal paste is pretty easy to do. So with the thermal paste, we've used Thermal Grizzly's Hydronaut, which is good for use with water blocks. And you'll also notice that it comes with a thermal paste spreader in the packaging. So all we do is we clean the GPU block with some isopropyl alcohol, and then we put a small blob of thermal paste directly on the die, and then we use the thermal spreader to spread it around. Now you need to make sure there's a nice thin layer on the die. Once there's a thin layer on the die, we know that the GPU block is going to push that and squidge it out, just in case there is any like hollow spots or anything like that. But you need to make sure the whole die is covered, as this is a die application. So once that's done, you'll be good to go. Right. So now we've cleaned the thermal paste spreader. We're going to use it to lift off the plastics all the way around. Just to maintain so I've sped up the video again just because this is quite a long process. So you just need to make sure you remove all of the little plastic coverings that protect the thermal pads. Now you'll notice I swapped the heat spreader to my guitar pick just because it's a bit thinner and a bit easier to use. You can also use some tweezers if you've got any, but I just prefer to use plastic tools. So I went ahead and removed all those the protections on the thermal pads. It just makes sure that no dust gets onto the thermal pads while during application, but you need to make sure they're removed off both sides during this process. Okay, so as you can see, every thermal pad is on. That's all good. Now it's time for the block. So, two things you got to do when you're putting the block on. First one is understand your pads may fall off. And the second is with this GPU in particular, what you want to do is pop that trusty backplate packer off. Pop it to one side. Grab your GPU. Check when you lifted your backplate off. Nothing's moved or shifted. Thermal pads are still in place where they were, that's fine. All those pads are in place. The pads that are on there are still there, so that's good. So we're going to use those. Then what we do, just double check the die is clean. So we'll stick that way for a moment. So you get your GPU, your block, and you want to match them up. Now what I have just noticed is that with the block, the block can't be fitted because of the faceplate. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the faceplate off completely now. And we're going to need a smaller screwdriver for that. To get the faceplate off, there are 6 screws, 4 tiny, 2 standard. Cool. So now we want to do as we said before, is offer up the block. To the PCB. Hey guys, all I'm doing here is just inspecting to make sure that the thermal pads are all still in place and in the correct areas that were initially installed, whilst the block has now been pushed against the PCB. Now, just to mention, there are a couple of screws that go into the PCB at this point, just to secure down the PCB to the block itself. However, the mounting pressure and that kind of stuff for the GPU is not done with sprung screws, it's done with the backplate, which we'll see in the videos following. But I just thought I'd give you guys a quick mention on that. I will also pop the link to the installation guide in the description, as the guide that actually comes with the block from the seller I bought it from an AliExpress was different to the block that I received. So I think they've had two versions of this block, and there's two different guides. Now, like I said, in this one, it's not using sprung screws. They've done a different mechanism, but you'll see that in the video coming forward. It doesn't fully make sense. And basically, they've provided these spring screws, but I think they're only for use in the event you don't use the back plate. So because the back plate's designed with this block in mind, where it puts pressure, they've designed it so that as that goes down, it puts pressure on the center of the die, which kind of makes sense to a point, but it just seems a little bit backwards, for lack of a better phrase. I mean, I get the thought process. So we're going to install it with a little bit of hesitation, as specified. I also don't know why this says Bykski upside down, because that's definitely why. So I don't know why, but it does. So I'm gonna go for that. So if I line this up here, like so, I then get all the aligned holes. But it says to put these through. So this must put the pressure on the die, but it doesn't fully make sense. Don't get me wrong, I don't work for Bykski, so I don't know how they designed it. I can see how it's pulling the GPU, pushing the thing down, so it makes sense as to what it's doing, but it just doesn't feel very... I don't know. Who am I to question the guys that actually made the block? Do you know what I mean? I'm sat here going, is it going to give enough pressure? It feels like it's going to give enough pressure, so I think only time will tell. I think the fact that it's got the hexagonal blocks all the way around kind of tells me that they have this thought in mind and it will work. I don't really want to kill my GPU. Okay, so just to do a little update, I've got the block on. It's a weird system in how they've done the mounting points. So basically, what it is... I've lost my screwdriver now. Right. What it is these 4 screws do hold the mounting pressure. What actually happens is you do them up as you build it, which is fine. Again, it's an unusual way of doing it in my head. But as you can see here, there's no bow or anything, which is what I was worried about. And there is pressure to the plate, so I'm not concerned about that either. But basically what happens is they've done these kind of like spaces and put 2 rubber pads underneath. So what actually happens is the pressure pushing the GPU die against the board is these 4 screws. That's all it is. So you have 4 screws, well, you have 8 screws in total connecting all 4 bits, but these 4 screws are what causes the pressure on the die. So what's happening is the die is getting pushed against these 4 screws because the whole plate's getting pressed. But the way they've done it is that I think there is very little pressure needed from Bykski's perspective in the way they've designed it. And I won't know until I turn it on and test it. I won't know. But basically what I think is happening here is the block's been designed in a way that there's already the direct contact is there straight away from the block, and then this just pushes it down that little bit further, and then the 2 rubber pads, the thick hard rubber pads they've put in place, just push it down. Now I've also left, as you can see here, I've left the thermal pads from the original backplate in place, so we'll see how it performs. But apart from that, I'm not concerned. As long as the die pressure's there and I don't see any kind of mass fluctuation in temperatures when I use it, I'm not that concerned. But if you are concerned, then I can understand why. But yeah, I'm going to plug it up now. I'm going to check the tubing run, see what I can do, and then we'll go from there.